never thought I'd end up in a place like this. 31 years old, and here I am, starting over in the middle of fucking nowhere. But when life hands you lemons, you make lemonade, right? Or in my case, when life takes away your teaching career because you couldn't handle a bunch of snot-nosed brats, you take whatever job comes your way. That's how I, Eric Halverson, former middle school English teacher and current unemployed loser, found myself driving down a winding road in northern Minnesota, headed to my new gig as a lodge manager. The pay was good, $65 an hour. But the location? Let's just say it wasn't exactly prime real estate. As I drove, the dense pine forests gave way to glimpses of a vast, mirror-like lake. The late afternoon sun glinted off its surface, creating an almost ethereal glow. It was beautiful, I'll give it that. But beauty doesn't pay the bills or restore a ruined reputation. I pulled up to the Whispering Pines Lodge, just as the sun was beginning to set. The main building was an imposing structure of dark wood and stone, its windows reflecting the orange sky like dozens of watchful eyes. A few smaller cabins dotted the shoreline, barely visible through the trees. Gravel crunched under my tires as I parked in front of the main lodge. The air was crisp and carried the scent of pine and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. As I stepped out of my car, the silence hit me. No traffic noise, no chatter of people, not even the call of birds. Just the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the whisper of wind through the pines. "Hello?" I called out, my voice seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet. No answer. Great start, Eric. Really stellar. I made my way up to the front door, my footsteps echoing on the wooden porch. A note was taped to the door. "Mr. Halverson, welcome to Whispering Pines Lodge. Your cabin is number 3, down the path to the left. Keys are under the mat. Orientation begins tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp in the main lodge. Management." Well, that was impersonal. I shrugged it off and headed down the path. The trees seemed to close in around me as I walked, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping unease. It was just nerves, that's all. New job jitters. Cabin number 3 was a small, rustic affair, its weathered wood blending seamlessly with the surrounding forest. I retrieved the keys from under the welcome mat and let myself in. The interior was cozy enough. A small living area with a stone fireplace, a kitchenette, and a door leading to what I assumed was the bedroom. It smelled of wood smoke and pine, with an underlying mustiness that spoke of long periods of disuse. I dropped my bag on the threadbare couch and stretched, my joints popping after the long drive. The silence was even more pronounced inside the cabin. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and loud in my ears. "Home, sweet home," I muttered, my voice sounding flat and lifeless in the quiet room. I decided to unpack and get settled. The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a queen-sized bed and a sturdy oak dresser. As I began to put away my clothes, I noticed something odd about the bottom drawer. It seemed off somehow, heavier than it should be. Curiosity piqued, I pulled it open. At first glance, it appeared empty, but as I ran my hand along the bottom, I felt a slight give. A false bottom? What the hell? I pried it up carefully, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age and covered in neat, precise handwriting. My heart rate picked up as I unfolded it. The heading at the top read, "Rules for Survival at Whispering Pines Lodge." A shiver of unease crawled down my back as I began to read. Rule 1. Never go outside between 2:37 a.m. and 5:14 a.m. No matter what you hear or see, stay inside. Rule 2. The lake is off limits after sunset. Do not approach the water's edge in the dark. Rule 3. If you hear whistling coming from the forest, do not whistle back. Close all windows and doors immediately. Rule 4. The paintings in the main lodge change. Do not acknowledge or comment on this. Act as if everything is normal. Rule 5. On Wednesdays, leave a small offering of food on your porch before sunset. It doesn't matter what, but it must be something you've prepared yourself. Rule 6. If you see a child wandering alone on the grounds, do not approach or speak to them. Report it to management immediately. Rule 7. The old rowboat by the dock is always empty. If you ever see someone sitting in it, return to your cabin immediately and lock the door. Rule 8. Never agree to play cards with guests after midnight. If invited, politely decline and retire to your cabin. Rule 9. If the phone rings exactly 3 times and stops, do not answer it if it rings again. Unplug it and wait until morning. Rule 10. Under no circumstances should you ever say the words, "I'm leaving," out loud. If you need to depart, simply go. Do not announce your intentions. I stared at the paper, my mind reeling. What the fuck was this? Some kind of joke? A hazing ritual for new employees? I read through the rules again, a nervous laugh bubbling up in my throat. This had to be a prank. Probably the work of the previous manager, trying to scare the new guy. Well, haha, very funny. I folded the paper and shoved it into my pocket, deciding to confront whoever was responsible tomorrow at orientation. For now, I needed sleep. The long drive and this weird welcome gift had left me exhausted. As I got ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The silence of the cabin seemed to press in on me, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood. I tried to rationalize it. Old building, unfamiliar surroundings, overactive imagination. But the unease persisted. I climbed into bed, the springs groaning under my weight. Despite my exhaustion, sleep was elusive. I tossed and turned, the rules playing over and over in my mind. What kind of place was this? Just as I was finally drifting off, a sound jolted me awake. Whistling, faint but clear, coming from somewhere in the forest outside my window. My heart leapt into my throat as I remembered rule number 3. Without thinking, I leapt out of bed and slammed the window shut, my hands shaking as I locked it. The whistling continued, growing louder and more insistent. I stumbled through the dark cabin, closing and locking every window and door. Only when I was sure everything was secure did I allow myself to breathe. The whistling faded away, leaving behind a silence that was somehow even more terrifying. I spent the rest of the night huddled in bed, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin. When dawn finally broke, I was bleary-eyed and on edge. The morning brought with it a sense of unreality. In the bright light of day, the events of the night seemed like a bad dream. I almost managed to convince myself that I had imagined it all, the rules, the whistling, everything. But as I dressed for orientation, my hand brushed against the folded paper in my pocket, and the cold reality came rushing back. This was no dream, and I had a sinking feeling that my life at Whispering Pines Lodge was about to get very, very complicated. I made my way to the main lodge, the gravel path crunching under my feet. The morning was crisp and clear, the lake a sheet of glass reflecting the blue sky. It was hard to reconcile this peaceful scene with the terror I had felt last night. The main lodge was as imposing in the daylight as it had been at dusk. I paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath before pushing open the heavy wooden door. The interior was all rustic charm, exposed beams, stone fireplace, mounted animal heads on the walls. It looked like every northern lodge I'd ever seen in movies or TV shows. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except, I froze, my eyes locked on one of the paintings on the wall. It was a landscape showing the lake at sunset, but I could have sworn that when I first glanced at it, it had been a sunrise scene. I blinked, and the painting was back to sunset. Rule number 4 echoed in my mind. The paintings in the main lodge change. Do not acknowledge or comment on this. Act as if everything is normal. My heart pounding, I forced myself to look away, pretending I hadn't noticed anything unusual. Just then, a voice called out from behind the reception desk. "Mr. Halverson, right on time. I'm Margaret, the day manager." I turned to see a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression. She gestured for me to follow her into a small office off the main lobby. As we sat down, I debated whether to bring up the rules I'd found. On one hand, I desperately wanted answers. On the other, if this was all some elaborate joke, I'd look like an idiot for falling for it. Margaret launched into an explanation of my duties, check-ins, maintenance requests, coordinating with housekeeping, all standard stuff. Nothing about mysterious rules or whistling in the woods or changing paintings. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Listen, Margaret," I interrupted. "I found something strange in my cabin last night. A list of rules." Margaret's face went pale, and she held up a hand to stop me. "Mr. Halverson," she said, her voice low and urgent, "we don't discuss those. Ever. Do you understand?" I stared at her. A cold shiver washed over me. "But, no buts," she cut me off. "Those rules exist for a reason. Follow them and you'll do fine here. Ignore them." She trailed off, leaving the consequences unspoken. The rest of the orientation passed in a blur. Margaret acted as if our exchange about the rules had never happened, and I was too stunned to press the issue. By the time I left the office, my head was spinning. This was real. The rules were real, and I was in way over my head. The next few days passed in a haze of routine and paranoia. I went through the motions of my job, checking in the occasional guest, fielding maintenance requests, restocking supplies. But always, the rules were at the back of my mind. I found myself watching the clock obsessively as 2:37 a.m. approached each night, making sure I was safely in my cabin with doors and windows locked. I avoided the lake after dark, even though the moonlit water called to me on warm evenings. And I never, ever whistled. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal, acting like I didn't notice the paintings changing in the main lodge, or the way the forest seemed to grow denser and darker at certain times of day. Smiling and making small talk with guests while wondering if they knew, if they could sense the wrongness of this place. It was Wednesday evening when things really started to go off the rails. I had just finished my shift and was heading back to my cabin when I remembered rule number 5. On Wednesdays, leave a small offering of food on your porch before sunset. It doesn't matter what, but it must be something you've prepared yourself. Panic set in as I realized I had nothing prepared. I raced to my cabin, throwing open cupboards and the small refrigerator. All I had were some eggs and a few slices of bread. It would have to do. With shaking hands, I scrambled an egg and toasted the bread. The sun was already dipping below the tree line as I placed the pitiful offering on a paper plate and set it on the porch. I retreated inside, locking the door behind me. As darkness fell, I peered out the window, watching the plate on the porch. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, just as I was about to give up and go to bed, I saw movement in the shadows. A figure, hunched and misshapen, crept out of the forest. It moved with an unnatural, jerky gait, like a marionette with tangled strings. I could make out long, spindly limbs and a head that seemed too large for its body. My breath caught in my throat as the creature approached my porch. It bent over the plate, and I heard a wet, slurping sound. In seconds, the food was gone. The creature turned, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought it looked directly at me through the window. Its face, if you could call it that, was a twisted mass of shadows with pinpricks of light where eyes should be. A gash of a mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, the creature was gone, leaving only the empty plate as evidence of its visit. Sleep was impossible that night. I sat up, lights on, jumping at every sound. When dawn finally broke, I was a wreck, exhausted and on edge. I dragged myself to work, knowing I looked like hell but past the point of caring. Margaret gave me a sharp look as I entered the lodge but said nothing. I was beginning to understand that here, silence was not just preferable. It was survival. As I went about my tasks, I couldn't shake the image of that creature from my mind. What was it? Why did it want our food? And what would have happened if I hadn't left an offering? I was so lost in these thoughts that I almost didn't notice the child at first. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8, standing alone by the lake. My first instinct was to approach her, to ask where her parents were. Then rule number 6 slammed into my mind. If you see a child wandering alone on the grounds, do not approach or speak to them. Report it to management immediately. I froze, torn between my natural instinct to help and the memory of that creature from last night. The girl turned, seeming to look right at me. Her eyes. There was something wrong with her eyes. They were too dark, too empty. Fighting every protective instinct I had, I turned and hurried back to the lodge. I found Margaret in her office, filling out paperwork. "There's a child," I gasped out. "By the lake, alone." Margaret's head snapped up, her face going pale. Without a word, she stood and strode out of the office. I followed, unsure of what else to do. By the time we reached the lake shore, the girl was gone. Margaret scanned the area, her expression grim. "You did the right thing," she said finally, her voice low. "Never approach them. Never." "Them?" I asked. "You mean there's more than one?" Margaret just shook her head and walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. The days began to blur together, each one bringing new horrors and impossibilities. I saw guests enter the old rowboat by the dock, only to vanish without a trace. I heard the phone ring 3 times in the middle of the night and lay awake until dawn, afraid to answer if it rang again. And always, there was the sense of being watched. Eyes in the forest, in the lake, in the very walls of the lodge itself. I thought about leaving, about packing my bags and driving away from this nightmare. But every time I considered it, rule number 10 echoed in my head. Under no circumstances should you ever say the words, "I'm leaving," out loud. If you need to depart, simply go. Do not announce your intentions. What would happen if I did say those words? The thought alone was enough to keep me paralyzed, trapped in this surreal existence. It was a Tuesday night when everything came to a head. I was doing a final walkthrough of the lodge before closing up for the night when I heard voices coming from the game room. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the shuffle of cards. I glanced at my watch. 11:58 p.m. A knot formed in my stomach as I remembered rule number 8. Never agree to play cards with guests after midnight. If invited, politely decline and retire to your cabin. I should have walked away. Should have gone straight to my cabin and locked the door. But curiosity, that damned, fatal curiosity, got the better of me. I peered into the game room. 4 guests sat around a table playing poker. They looked normal enough. 2 middle-aged men, a young woman, and an elderly gentleman. As I watched, one of them glanced up and saw me. "Hey there, Eric," he called out. I recognized him as Mr. Jenkins, a regular guest. Care to join us for a hand? I opened my mouth to decline, but the words stuck in my throat. These were just normal people, right? What harm could there be in one hand of cards? The clock on the wall ticked over to midnight just as I stepped into the room. I felt a shudder creep over me, but I forced a smile. "Sure, why not?" I said, pulling up a chair. As I sat down, I could have sworn the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. The other players smiled at me, but their eyes... Something was off about their eyes. Too bright, too fixed. "Glad you could join us, Eric," the young woman said, her voice oddly flat. "We've been waiting for you." The elderly gentleman dealt the cards with surprising dexterity, his gnarled hands moving in a blur. As I picked up my hand, I noticed the cards felt wrong. Too cold, almost damp to the touch. We played in silence for what felt like hours. I tried to keep track of the game, but the rules seemed to shift with each hand. Cards appeared and disappeared. Suits changed mid-play. My head started to spin. I think I should go," I stammered, pushing back from the table. "But the game isn't over yet, Eric," Mr. Jenkins said, his smile too wide, showing too many teeth. "You can't leave now." The room seemed to stretch and warp around me. The other players' faces began to melt, features running like wax. I stumbled to my feet, knocking over my chair. "I'm leaving," I blurted out, then froze as I realized what I'd said. The temperature plummeted. Frost began to form on the windows, creeping across the glass in intricate patterns. The other players stood, their forms twisting and elongating into impossible shapes. "Oh, Eric," the young woman's voice came out as a hiss. "You really shouldn't have said that." I ran. Out of the game room, through the lodge, into the night. Behind me, I could hear inhuman shrieks and the sound of splintering wood. I didn't look back, just ran blindly toward my cabin. The forest seemed alive around me, branches reaching out to snag my clothes, roots rising up to trip me. I could hear something crashing through the undergrowth behind me, getting closer with each passing second. I burst into my cabin, slamming the door shut and fumbling with the lock. Something heavy thudded against the other side, making the whole structure shake. I backed away, looking wildly around for a weapon, an escape route, anything. My eyes fell on the drawer where I'd found the rules. Moving on instinct, I yanked it open and pulled up the false bottom. The paper with the rules was still there, but now there was something else as well. A small, ornate key. Without thinking, I grabbed the key. As soon as my fingers touched it, the pounding on the door stopped. An unnatural silence fell over the cabin. I stood there, heart racing, key clutched in my sweating palm. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I collapsed onto the bed, still fully clothed. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. Then I felt the key, still gripped tightly in my hand. Moving cautiously, I made my way outside. The forest looked normal in the morning light. No sign of the chaos from the night before. I walked to the main lodge, unsure of what I'd find. Everything was as it should be. Guests were eating breakfast in the dining room. Margaret was at the front desk, sorting through paperwork. She looked up as I approached, her eyes widening slightly at my disheveled appearance. "Rough night, Mr. Halverson?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I say? That I'd broken the rules? That I'd seen my fellow card players turn into monsters? I think I need to leave, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's face softened just for a moment. "I understand," she said. "It's not for everyone. Just be careful how you go." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak again. I turned and walked out of the lodge for the last time. As I packed my meager belongings, I debated whether to leave the key behind. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to part with it. It went into my pocket, along with the list of rules. I took one last look around the cabin, then walked out, closing the door softly behind me. The gravel crunched under my feet as I made my way to my car. I didn't look back at the lodge, didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just got in my car and drove. As the dense Minnesota forests gave way to open farmland, I began to relax. I'd made it out. I was safe. It wasn't until I stopped for gas 100 miles down the road that I realized something was wrong. My wallet was missing. So was my phone. In fact, all of my identifying documents were gone. Panic rose in my throat as I patted down my pockets. The only things there were the key and the list of rules. With shaking hands, I unfolded the paper, sure that I'd imagined the whole thing. But there they were, 10 rules for survival at Whispering Pines Lodge. And at the bottom, in fresh ink that glistened as if still wet, an 11th rule had appeared. Rule 11. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. I stood there, staring at the paper, as the implications sank in. I had no money, no ID, no way to prove who I was. And somewhere in the pine-scented shadows of northern Minnesota, something was waiting for me to return. I got back in my car and started driving. I don't know where I'm going. All I know is that I can't stop, can't look back. Because if I do, I'm afraid of what I might see following me. So if you're ever up in Minnesota and you see a job listing for a lodge manager, paying $65 an hour, do yourself a favor. Keep driving. Some jobs aren't worth the pay, and some places don't let go of their employees easily. And if you do find yourself at Whispering Pines Lodge, remember the rules. Your life may depend on it. Sarah Miller stretched as she got out of her car, breathing in the crisp Minnesota air. After a long drive from Minneapolis, she was looking forward to a relaxing week at Whispering Pines Lodge. The place had great reviews online, promising a perfect blend of rustic charm and modern amenities. As she approached the main lodge, a stern-looking older woman greeted her at the reception desk. "Welcome to Whispering Pines, Ms. Miller. I'm Margaret, the day manager. Your cabin is all ready for you." Sarah smiled, taking the key Margaret held out. "Thanks. I'm really looking forward to my stay. Oh, by the way, I was wondering if you could recommend any good hiking trails around here." Margaret's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "There are several well-marked trails. I'd advise sticking to those and not wandering off into the woods. It's easy to get lost out there. Sarah nodded, sensing there was more to the warning than Margaret was saying. Got it? Thanks for the tip. She made her way to her assigned cabin, a cozy little structure nestled among the pines. As she entered, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cabin was clean and well maintained, but it felt lived in somehow, as if someone had just stepped out moments before she arrived. Shrugging off the sensation, Sarah began to unpack. As she opened the dresser drawer to put away her clothes, her hand brushed against something stuck to the underside of the drawer. Curious, she pried it loose. It was a photograph. In it, a man in his early 30s stood in front of the main lodge, smiling awkwardly at the camera. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, but there was something else in his expression. Fear? Sarah turned the photo over. On the back, in hasty handwriting, was scrawled, Eric Halverson, new lodge manager, May 15th, 2023. She frowned. The photo couldn't be more than a few months old, but she hadn't seen any male employees during check-in, just Margaret and a couple of cleaning staff. A loud thud from outside made her jump. Sarah went to the window but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just the wind, probably. As she turned back to her unpacking, her foot caught on something protruding slightly from under the bed. She knelt down to investigate and found herself pulling out a duffel bag. With a growing sense of unease, Sarah opened the bag. Inside were men's clothes, a few books, and a wallet. She flipped open the wallet, her heart racing. The driver's license inside bore the name Eric Halverson and showed the same face as the man in the photograph. Sarah's mind raced. Why would the former manager leave all his belongings behind? And why hadn't anyone cleaned out the cabin before renting it out again? A chill ran down her spine as she remembered Margaret's warning about the woods. Suddenly, the forest outside her window seemed darker, more oppressive. Sarah grabbed her phone, intending to call the front desk and demand some answers. But as she did, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the corner of the screen, where the signal strength should be, there was only a message. No service. Welcome to Whispering Pines. She sank onto the bed, Eric Halverson's belongings scattered around her, the woods pressing in on all sides. And for the first time since arriving, Sarah Miller began to wonder if coming to Whispering Pines Lodge had been a terrible mistake.